Popular YouTubers Matt McMuscles and Super Eyepatch Wolf recently collaborated on a video titled Shenmue 3 What Happened? The video is meant to drive home the opinion that Shenmue 3 is a terrible game. What happened, you ask? I'll tell you exactly what happened. Shenmue 3 finally launched after nearly 2 decades against all odds, developed by an indie studio who made a gorgeous looking game in an engine they had no experience with, and had to build it all from the ground up. They had to create a follow-up to a legendary franchise with a small fraction of the original's budget and development team size. Hopefully that clarifies some things for you fellas. Now let's dive into the specifics. Alright, well here we are again. Another day, another Shenmue 3 response video to Super Eyepatch Wolf and his friends. So here's the deal. Everybody has their own opinions about various games. Some people think Shenmue 3 is a great game. Some people think it's an average game. Some people hate it. Some people think it's terrible. And that's the thing. You can have your opinion. That's totally fine. But I'm going to bring a little bit of sensibility to his arguments. So what I'm going to do for this video is I'm going to show some clips from Matt McMuscles and Super Eyepatch Wolf, their collaboration video. I'm going to show some clips from their video and then respond to those clips. A lot of their video is stating facts, like if it goes over the development of the game and just all the little things that went on behind the scenes. But it gets annoying when he starts stating opinions as facts and is misguided on a couple of them. So here we go. Let's get into it. Clip number 1.
So at E3 2015, Sony proudly declared that they were putting the full weight of their E3 stage show behind Yu Suzuki so he could officially announce the Shenmue 3 Kickstarter, which was kind of extremely weird. That Sony was providing an undisclosed chunk of the game's true budget, but not the full amount, and they didn't want to directly publish it either, which is, again, just really weird.
No, it's not. Because Shenmue as a series, when you go back and look at Shenmue 1 and Shenmue 2, they cost Sega a whole lot of money. It was a huge investment. They didn't get it back. Shenmue 1 actually did sell well for being a Dreamcast exclusive, but it wasn't enough. They needed to sell even more, which in some cases was not physically possible. So the problem with Shenmue 3 is that because the original 2 games had this kind of negative stigma financially about them, it'd be very difficult to find a publisher that would 100% fund it all the way, even for a multi-billion-dollar company like Sony. They found it to be too risky. And there's lots of reason to believe that other companies were approached as well, like Microsoft and who knows who else. So in the case of Shenmue 3, the Kickstarter was used as kind of like a gauge to see what the public interest was. It's not the ideal solution, of course. I mean, if it were up to me, I would have Sony or Microsoft or some other big company come in and just fund it all 100%, AAA title, all the development, all the funds you could possibly need to get it done and do it right. But that's not the world we live in. We live in a world where corporations weigh their options and see what is profitable, what's likely to not be profitable, and all that stuff. They have to weigh in all their options. So that's why Sony gave some of their 2015 E3 conference time to Yu Suzuki to launch officially the Shenmue 3 Kickstarter. And you have to understand that renting that space to do an E3 conference costs them a whole lot of money. I mean, that was a huge investment. That was, I mean, the whole world is watching this conference. So for Sony to devote a good chunk of their time to a Kickstarter project, it is a big deal, even if it seems kind of lame to people on the outside. I don't really understand the inner workings of this thing. I can understand why people would think that it's lame, but it's actually really cool of Sony to do to bring more attention to the Kickstarter project, which ended up breaking all the records, of course, as we know now. So we can come back around to that and touch more on that later, but let's go with the next clip.
Almost all the choices they made were wrong.
That's an opinion, and I disagree with that statement. So, next clip.
For no other reason than just wanting to change a core system that was established in the previous 2 games to be less intimidating for new players, Yu Suzuki or some other madman decided to scrap this system altogether, and in its place was something else.
The entire game and the fighting engine had to be rebuilt from the ground up, so Yu Suzuki took this opportunity to try to improve on something that a lot of players didn't really find too enticing or too satisfying in the original games. Now, of course, I can't speak for everybody, and neither can he, but I know a lot of people that played Shenmue 1 or 2 or both very casually, so they never really learned the inner workings of the fighting system. They had no idea it was based on Virtua Fighter. They just say, oh, it's kind of a clunky multi-opponent fighting game. I can say that personally, I do know some people that did play through Shenmue and just button mashed the hell out of the combat, so they didn't really try to learn anything. They just smashed all the buttons and got through it. So with that being the case, you're always going to have that kind of divide. You have to find a good balance between, okay, what is a really good technical fighting system versus one that's more accessible where you can still do cool stuff. So Shenmue 3, I think, found a good balance. It's not perfect. It's definitely, not the best thing out there, and it has some room for improvement, but I think it's definitely far from as bad as he's claiming it to be. And we're going to touch on that in a little bit. So let's go on to the next clip.
We rebuilt Shenmue 3's combat from scratch. It's much more fun to play and much more approachable, even if you don't have much skill. We're using some AI elements, so even if you're just randomly pushing buttons, something meaningful will happen. Even if you're randomly pushing buttons, something meaningful will happen.
Randomly pushing buttons in a fighting game and something meaningful happened? That's crazy. No one's ever done that before. Oh wait, what's this? Next clip.
If this game was indeed for the fans, why strip out something that was so fundamental to the experience of the first two Shenmues?
Something that was so fundamental to the experience of the first two Shenmue games was the combat. I would disagree with that statement. I think that the combat is a fraction of what makes Shenmue a great game. Of course, there's other elements like the story, the characters, the environments, the exploration, the figuring out what you can do and what you can't do. The combat is just kind of like a tiny snippet of what makes Shenmue, in my opinion. Because yeah, it's important. Ryo goes on this epic journey and becomes a true martial artist, but at the same time, the combat isn't the core of the game. Next clip.
Interacting with objects, speaking to characters, just doing anything within Shenmue 3's world remained as clunky as ever.
Wrong. Did this guy even play Shenmue 1 and 2? Because Shenmue 3 made tons of improvements in the area of movement, controls, and interactivity. So I don't know what the hell he's talking about here. I really don't. If you see someone you want to talk to, you walk up to them and press a button. If you see something you want to interact with, you walk up to it and press a button. What is he expecting exactly? So I'm just completely baffled at this one. Your guess is as good as mine. Next clip.
The new stamina bar drains throughout the day, and if you get too low, Ryo can no longer run and performs worse in battles. In contrast to the relaxing nature of the earlier games, this meter constantly badgers Ryo to eat, which in turn drains his finances, which in turn artificially extends the game's playtime.
Okay, so his main point here is the fact that your health bar drains, so you have to buy food, which artificially extends the playtime by you having to find money to pay for this food. I can see where he's coming from, but in order to fully answer that or fully address that, I have to explain why Yu Suzuki implemented this to begin with. Some people may not agree with it, but it is what it is. And the reason why it is what it is because Yu Suzuki wanted players to go out and figure out different ways to earn money, whether it's chopping wood, finding herbs, doing the gambling, and just kind of exploring. The financial aspect was used as a vehicle for the player to do more exploration. So that's kind of the whole purpose behind it. It does artificially extend the playtime for the game, which, especially in the other sections of the game where you have to buy those expensive items to progress the story, I can see where he's coming from there, but you have to understand why the decisions were made to implement that in the game. That's the story behind that. So, here we go, next clip.
As for the story, the main thing that most, if not all, Shenmue fans were anticipating is to finally have the story advance, to finally see Ryo avenge the death of his father, and it just doesn't happen.
Of course it doesn't happen, because it was never going to end with Shenmue 3. All the hardcore Shenmue fans always knew from the beginning that Shenmue 3 was never going to conclude the story. I wasn't even sure it was going to conclude the Lan Di story arc. I was hoping it would, but I was kind of expecting it not to. So honestly, I don't know anybody that was expecting the story to conclude or to have Ryo finally avenge his father in Shenmue 3, because obviously, story-wise, he's not ready. He's not an accomplished master martial artist yet. There's no way he can fight Lan Di, obviously. And he is right about one thing. It didn't progress the story in a very massive, meaningful way, but in the words of Aerosmith, life's a journey, not a destination. The Shenmue saga isn't necessarily about Ryo getting revenge, although that's how it starts out, and that's the vehicle that the player uses to have Ryo learn all these new martial art techniques. At the end of his journey, Ryo is going to be a martial arts master, having mastered all these techniques and having all this wisdom, because at its core, Shenmue is the Virtua Fighter RPG. Ryo is Akira from Virtua Fighter, essentially. So essentially, the Shenmue story is Ryo's journey to becoming a true master martial artist, and surpassing his father in every way. So now that that's out of the way, on to the next clip.
At the end of Shenmue 2, Ryo watches Landy get away, and at the end of Shenmue 3, Ryo watches Landy get away again. 18 years of waiting, basically, for nothing.
18 years of waiting for nothing, except that's not true. In my opinion, Shenmue 3 is exactly what it was supposed to be. Shenmue 3 was all about Ryo learning more techniques and learning a whole different style of martial arts, and that's exactly what it was. Just training and grinding for days. It's not everybody's cup of tea, but I enjoyed it for what it was. Next clip.
However, being a full 2 years late was a hard pill to swallow for even the staunchest of Shenmue fans.
No, it wasn't. Next clip.
Huge projects like this, full 3D open world adventure RPGs, just aren't suited for crowdfunding. To really pull them off and pull them off well, you need hundreds of staff and millions more in funding than what ardent fans could possibly donate.
Exactly, which is why there were multiple partners. You had Shibuya Productions, Deep Silver, Epic Games, Sony, and God knows who else. There wasn't any one entity that was willing to take the financial risk to fully fund Shenmue 3 and make it the game that Yu Suzuki always had in mind. And I addressed all this at the beginning of the video, so we're just going to move on. Next clip.
Despite having Steam logos on the original marketing materials, and despite the opening of an official Steam page for the game that housed regular updates, Deep Silver announced in 2019 that they had made a deal with Epic to secure Shenmue 3 as an EGS exclusive. You can't make these types of decisions 2 years after the fact and expect people to be happy that they can no longer get the game they donated their money towards.
I am so sick of hearing this argument. Back when the Kickstarter was live in 2015, for the 30 days it was live, nowhere on the Kickstarter page, while people were pledging money to it, did it say that it was going to come out to Steam or Epic Game Store. It just said PC. We're getting a PC version, and that's what you pledged your money to. It wasn't until long after the Kickstarter campaign concluded that they announced, yep, we're going to go ahead and have a Steam version. But then plans changed and they got a deal with Epic Games for additional funding. And at the end of the day, it's just business, and it ended up giving Yu Suzuki and his team more money, more time to get the project done. So I'm glad that it worked out that way. Next clip.
Boxed retail versions of Shenmue 3 that were handled by Deep Silver contained exclusive pre-order bonuses. These items would not be available to any backers of the Kickstarter who had pledged at any tier level.
That's because it was a different product. On one hand, you had the Kickstarter version, which had its own separate tiers, and they were just kind of like gathering the money, the funds, and trying to figure out what was going to go where. And then you have the final product, which is what the pre-order bonuses went towards. And that was all handled by Deep Silver. That had nothing to do with Yu Suzuki and his team. So honestly, I can see why there would be some outrage, because some people looked at Kickstarter as a pre-order when in reality they're totally separate. In Kickstarter, there is no product. There is no product. You're paying to have the product made, and you're helping to get that product made. With pre-order bonuses, it's a finished deal. It's a done deal, and you're going to get the finished product plus whatever bonuses for pre-ordering. So they are separate things. They're not one and the same. And that's a common misconception, especially when people bring up Shenmue 3. It's not a big deal. That's just my opinion anyway. Let's go on to the next clip.
Come November of 2019, both critics and fans were heavily divided on the end product, as it played exactly like the old games.
Hey, I like the fact that it plays just like the old games. That's exactly what I was expecting. And maybe that's why I liked it so much. Next clip.
And honestly, in the end, it was always going to be impossible to please everyone.
You think?
Suzuki has expressed a desire to make a Shenmue 4, but as of now, there's been nothing concrete announced.
This is true, there has been no concrete information regarding Shenmue 4, but Shenmue 4 does exist in video form, and apparently this video is being shown to various business partners or potential business partners, so we can only hope something good comes out of it. Anyways, next clip.
Kickstarter can be a wonderful tool for game creators to realize their dreams, but due to a multitude of reasons, it just wasn't the right avenue for Shenmue to have taken.
Like I said, it wasn't ideal. It wasn't the best possible outcome that could have been, but it's the only one. This was the only option. It was either go the Kickstarter route or not have Shenmue 3 at all and having no chance of ever seeing the Shenmue saga complete. So it had to be this way. So that's that. Next clip.
And as of 2021, we're right back where we started, with Ryo Hazuki being no closer to finally achieving his destiny.
What is his destiny exactly? Is his destiny to avenge his father, or to become a true great master martial artist? I think it's the second one. And in that case, we are a lot closer because he's learned a lot and he's met a lot of good instructors along the way. And personally, I do think we're going to see the saga complete. I think we will eventually see Shenmue 4 and 5, and that will be the end of the saga, and I'm sure we're going to be arguing about it then and discussing whether or not the games are good. Speaking of which, I found another YouTube channel by the name of Major Lee. This channel has about 50,000 subscribers, so it's much bigger than this channel, but much smaller than Super Eyepatch Wolf or Matt McMuscles. But he made a video called Shenmue Trilogy Review, because why not? And I'll leave a link in the description below for that video if you want to check it out. I think it's really well written, and I don't agree with all the points he made in that video, but what I found very interesting is that he's pretty much the exact opposite of Super Eyepatch Wolf. Both of them consider themselves to be big Shenmue fans, but they have totally opposite opinions. For example, Super Eyepatch Wolf thinks Shenmue 2 is a great game. It's a vast improvement over the first one, and I'm in that boat. I think Shenmue 2 is the best in the series. Out of the 3 games, I think Part 2 is the best. Major Lee thinks it's the worst in the series. He hates Part 2. He thinks it's the worst one. And then he thinks Shenmue 3 is a great game, with the combat being excellent. And here's a clip from that video.
Now, the combat is so much better in Shenmue 3, it's not even funny. I know some people are gonna disagree with that, and probably prefer the Virtua Judo Grapple Fest that we had previously, but this is clearly smoother and more satisfying in every way.
So I guess at the end of the day, what I'm trying to say is that everyone's gonna have their own opinions about a variety of games. You can love Shenmue, you can hate it, you can love certain parts of it but hate others, and that's totally fine. What I hate is whenever somebody comes along and tries to force their opinion on you, and then they get upset whenever you don't accept their opinion. Like you're the one that's wrong automatically. And the combat is kind of a big dividing line. Some people love the combat in Shenmue 3, some people hate it. I'm kind of in the middle, where I can see that there's been some improvements made over the originals, but it kind of steps backward in a couple of areas, so I'm kind of in the middle. I do like it. I found it to be enjoyable, but it definitely could improve some. But that's all I got for this video. It kind of ran on a little bit longer than I wanted to, but you know, I had to say some things and I had to address it. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you again really soon.